we're back.
Okay, so we're back, but I don't know. Was the last part saved?
Yeah, it'll save. Just keep going.
Oh, okay, great. Okay, thanks. I forgot that there's a 40-minute time limit on
Yeah,
this with the
yeah,
free version. I have to
yeah,
upgrade. So, at any rate, where was I before we were
yeah,
rudely
yeah.
cut off?
Uh,
The oh, I forgot. I've totally lost my train of thought. We were talking. Oh, well, the meaning, the question, and this and the intentional communities, and I think
that's
this is
right.
what attracts people to the Latin Mass. But it goes to show that the church needs to articulate a better sense of what the meaning of being a Catholic is. We need to remember, right, why Christ caught on like wildfire in the early Mediterranean
Right,
Roman world
right,
was
right,
because what the message of the gospel was is that Christ liberates you from some kind of slavery.
right,
The fundamental message wasn't convert and follow Jesus or you're going to go to hell. If you
right,
St. Paul never talks that way.
right,
St.
right.
Paul never talks that way. He
Yeah,
talks about principalities and powers and being liberated and all of that kind of stuff. Christ liber and this has got to be it's got to be a more fundamentally positive message. The
that's right.
reason why you're going to be a Catholic because it's good for you. It
That's right.
makes
Right.
joyous, it's happy, it
Right.
liberates.
Right. Not like I'm not counting like, my deposits and, hoping that my bank deposit doesn't get blown up because of, mortal sin or something like that. Obviously sin's important. I'm not trying to downplay any of that, but the truth is exactly what you're talking about. My question as we were talking here is like, why does any of this matter? Like, why does it matter? And I think it ultimately matters is because it helps us make sense out of the world. It helps me make sense out of myself. And it helps me make sense out of the world that I want my kids to live in. And it gives me an impetus to build and to create and to protect and to serve and all those things, right? That we actually do care about. And I worry that the church getting so caught up in its sort of accommodationist idiom as of late, and this is certainly what drives me nuts about the whole listening gambit, is that of course you have to listen to the Holy Spirit, but to co-opt the sort of listening thing as sort of a front so that we can make all of these changes to the church. It's like, I think about the early churches you just invoked, and did Paul, go around the Mediterranean on a listening tour? I mean, is that what he did, Larry?
Yeah,
Was he
yeah,
like, did he go to the Areopagus so he could say, guys, like, what do y'all think? No,
yeah, yeah,
like we've got the gospel. Like I
yeah.
don't get this listening thing. I really don't.
Yeah, we need to listen to what the Athenians have to say and then have a synod about it. And then
Yeah.
and let's workshop that and come up with the gospel that we can accommodate to that. And we really need to accompany these Athenians along the way.
Right.
And let's not, so you get, it's insane. This is exactly why people sometimes get confused by me. I can be
Mm-hmm.
so hard on the trads and so on,
Right. Well,
but I'm much harder.
I think you're trying to get at where we need to get. I mean, you're trying to hit the
Yeah,
mark.
I mean, I'm even harder on the proggies, the progressives,
Yeah.
because the fact is, Catholicism light, which is nothing more, as you pointed out, simply an accommodation to the culture, turns Catholicism into a chameleon that takes on the coloration of
Mm-hmm.
whatever culture it
Mm-hmm.
is not going to give that provocation to liberation. Because if the church is simply saying, you're in the culture, we are too, let's just live in the culture, it
Right.
doesn't give a liberating message there. The church has to be countercultural. It has to stay
Mm-hmm.
by its
Mm-hmm.
orthodox message, countercultural gospel message. Only that will attract people. Because only that will appear as something different,
Okay.
something
Okay.
catalytic, something
Absolutely.
provocative.
Right. So okay. So like again, part of the sort of the commentariat that has sort of flowed out of this whole 60th anniversary and the Douthit column and all this sort of stuff. Right. The thing that drives me nuts about it is that it is using me say I have a problem with the Second Council, not like in and of itself, but as the phenomena, right? Like I'm watching, like hey, I'm asking questions, right? More crimes of noticing, as I like to say, right? And instead of like, well, we just need to, get on board with the project, and I'm just sort of asking questions like, well, what actually is this project? I mean, what are we talking about? Like, I don't know what it is.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But I know what it
That's so
looks
true.
like. I know what it looks
Well,
like.
they don't know what the project is, which is why they're having listening sessions, apparently, which only is why I'm so cynical about it, because I think they know darn well what their project is. It's a project of accommodationism.
Mhm.
And so they can't just come right out and say, hey, we're going to have gay marriage, we're going to have women priests,
Right,
we're going to have married
right.
priests, we're going to have contraception, we're going to have
Mhm,
cohabitation, we're
mhm.
going to have communion for the divorced and remarried, we're going to have intercommunion with Protestants.
So, so
And
notice
all, we're
what
going
they've
to have
done.
all that, but we're going to bring it in through the back door because we
Right.
can't bring it in the front door.
So I believe that something like Traditionis Custodes, or I'm bad with the Latin, I'm sorry, the
That's no,
TC.
you got it.
So it's a fascinating, again, I'm just sort of looking back, not a theologian, but I watch patterns, right? I'm looking back, I look at this thing, and it's like, look at the at the I said this today on Twitter, and you can check me, but I swear to you, Larry, they have turned trads, the sort of the Vaticanistas, they have turned the trads into Emmanuel Goldstein from 1984. They have,
Yes.
they have invoked this boogeyman of the Latin mass guy. And of course, there are all kinds of folks on YouTube who will gladly play that role, and they do every day, to the tune of however it is, however much they make a year. So, but it's like the trads are coming. The trads are coming. They're going to destroy Vatican II. It's like, no, 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 no. That's not what's going on. They're using the trads as a mechanism with which to bang people like me and you, I think, into submission to this listening synod thing, the synod and synodality. And it is
Yeah.
really difficult, to not notice what I'm noticing.
Yeah, it is. I mean, so many of these trads started off as nothing more than John Paul II conservative style Catholics
Yeah,
who got red pilled by Pope Francis.
yeah,
And then if you look at someone like Taylor Marshall, we've talked
yeah,
about this before.
yeah,
His
yeah, yeah,
early days, he was a JP2 Benedict Catholic. He was
yeah,
perfectly fine.
yeah.
As the Francis freight train rolled on, he was red pilled and became increasingly radical. And now there he is.
Right.
All right. And so the very, like you said, the Vaticanistas are the ones who, under Francis, are the ones who created this dynamic by interjecting a crisis into the church of a crisis of authority that did not need to be there,
Right. And
undermining
Larry,
the very,
and
go
it's
ahead.
not Vatican II. I think your
No,
point, your
it
point is that
isn't.
that is not Vatican synodality, synod, but that's not Vatican II.
Certainly not what Vatican II meant. Vatican II spoke of collegiality, which
Yeah.
was the more shared authority between the Pope and the bishops.
Right.
The great innovation of Vatican II was that previous to the council, it was thought that a bishop, by virtue of his ordination, had the power to teach the faith directly from God.
Right.
But he did not have the power to sanctify and govern, or was it the other way around? Sanctify but not teach or govern. But those last two were given by the Pope directly,
Right.
directly.
Right.
So in other words, the bishops were treated like vassals of the Pope.
Well, they're
So the
branch
Vatican
managers, to
branch
use
managers.
our
So
lingo. They're branch
Vatican II
managers.
comes along and says, no, no, bishops have by divine right, in virtue of their ordination, the power to teach, govern, and sanctify, all three munera or functions
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
episcopacy. They're not given by the Pope. That's
Which,
all that. And so
yeah.
because of that, the council encouraged more collegiality between the bishops themselves and episcopal conferences and the Pope. But the word synod and synodality is nowhere mentioned at the council. And then the version of synodality that we are getting is some sort of Oprah Winfrey listening session, is certainly
So
not what the council meant. It's
no,
all a sham.
it feels that way. So okay, so getting to, let's just tack on over to the synod real quick then, while we still have a few minutes.
And we'll talk about Cardinal Mueller too.
Well, that's where I'm going, right? So Cardinal Mueller gets on Raymond Arroyo's show the other day and basically says that the synod is basically pressing full speed ahead, so that the ship, the bark of Peter, is going to run into the rocks and destroy it, right? Something like that, right? I mean, I'm
Right,
being somewhat
right,
art,
right.
flair in my
It's
speech.
going to be the
So
destruction of the church.
the destruction of the church, right? And then of course the usual suspects will, on the right and the left, or in the whatever, the modernists and the trads, get on the what about Matthew 16? What about Matthew 16? And it's like, so I feel like we really need to, what do we mean by this whole Matthew 16 thing?
Yeah, I think if the modern church has taught us anything, it is that we have had a greatly inflated sense, a romanticized sense of what we mean when we say the church is infallible.
Right,
There's
right.
just been, I mean, you see people like
And
Steve Skojak, your friend
on,
Steve
yeah,
Skojak, who has been
yeah,
brutally honest about this. I'm
yeah,
going to take a look at this now and say, with brutal honesty, the church has changed some of its
yeah,
teachings.
yeah.
I mean, we talked about some before, burning heretics at the stake. Almost everybody's going to hell. You have
Right,
to be in communion with the Roman pontiff in order to go to heaven. Things like that. Other religions have no religious freedom unless the church grants it to them, and so on.
right, right.
Those have all been reversed. All of those doctrines have been reversed, or at least modified in some fashion,
So then
radical
what do we
fashion
do
by
with
the.
that, Larry?
So
Like, what do
happens
you do
then
with that?
when you have an authoritative statement from a pope from 500 years ago that is now contradicted by a modern thing? To be honest with you, I have not completely worked it out theologically in my own
Mm-hmm,
head. I've come up with what I call, in terms of interpreting the infallibility of the tradition, what I call the hermeneutics of kenosis,
mm-hmm.
which is an ongoing project. One thing I'm not going to do is simply walk away from the church.
Sure, sure,
Lord,
sure.
to whom shall we go? You have the words of
Right.
eternal life. That's not an
Mm-hmm.
option for me. And I'm just going to say, I mean, I've never been the kind of Catholic who was a Catholic because he felt some need for the church to be this immovable boulder and
Yeah,
rock.
yeah,
I've
yeah.
always had a sense of the church's fluidity. Now it's just a little increase. So I've just got to work this out in my own mind a little better as to, okay, what do we mean then when the church is indefectible, when the church is infallible? And I think we have to dial it back a bit and say, well, it's pretty clear. It doesn't mean the church can never teach some howlers, right?
Right.
Because it has taught some howlers on some rather important. The typical conservative response to say, well, those were not important doctrines, those were peripheral, those were not central to the faith,
But
and
but
more.
but Larry,
But they kind of were, actually.
right, right, they were, but even like even more than that, right? The deeper, the invocation is always, the gates of hell shall not prevail, right?
Right.
And well, what do we mean by that, right? I mean, it's like I'm not a military historian either, but I know that in a war, one side typically wins and one side typically loses. So but what I also know is that loads and loads and loads of people die. Even if you're on the winning team, you've got people who die. So how do we, so Mueller gets on and sort of says these things, and you could argue that maybe he's being a little bit intemperate for a cardinal to say such a thing. I don't think that's intemperate. I think he's being honest. So what do we mean? How do you take somebody like Cardinal Mueller to mean when he says that the synod on synodality could destroy the church?
Well, first off, I think he's being hyperbolic for sure.
Right,
And so you've got the clowns over at where Peter is going all hyperbolic and saying, "Oh, he said the church might be destroyed, but Christ said it'll never be destroyed, so
right,
he's
right,
wrong.
right,
How could a
right.
cardinal be wrong?" Oh God, what idiots.
Yeah,
He's obviously trying to express what are the fears that people
right,
have out
right,
there.
right,
And the
right.
great fear, of course, of course, Cardinal Mueller believes that Christ's church isn't going to
Yeah,
be
right,
utterly
right,
destroyed. But
right, right.
what he's trying to say is the church, as we have all come to know and love it, is going to be radically subverted
Mhm.
and radically undermined to the point where we're not going to be able to recognize it any longer as the
Right.
true church. And this is
Yeah,
why it's going to lead people astray, because it's going to be hard for people to see that this really is the church anymore. And this is
right.
this is what he's getting. And the reason is as we've all already articulated this, if you look at who Pope Francis has empowered to
Mhm.
become cardinals in major sees in the West, to run the synod and all that. When you
Well,
see his constant LGBTQ promotion, he says in one breath, "Oh, that's all bad, horrible," and then he promotes James Martin, writes
yeah.
letters to New Ways Ministry, promotes German bishops
Okay.
to,
So
to blah
we
blah
all see
blah.
this. So Larry, you and I see this. Like it's as crystal clear as can be. Like
It's a
I'm
sham.
I'm
Yeah,
really confident about this. Yet people would be like, well, we just don't understand what Pope Francis's project is.
it's pretty clear. It's
Eh, eh,
1975.
I was saying it looks pretty clear to me. I mean, it looks like
Yeah,
he wants to sort of do a dismantle. I mean, it's what it looks like to me.
that's right.
For what? I don't
The,
know what. Like why?
my critics say that because I grew up in the 70s, I'm projecting onto Pope Francis my own baggage from the
Come
70s.
on,
Hey,
come
Pope
on.
Francis lived through that era too.
Yeah.
And it could just possibly be he was incredibly formed by it. All right. So don't dismiss those of us who are older who remember that era. When we point to Pope Francis and we say, "You sound exactly like people spoke right down to words like rigid and dialogue and all that. That's how they spoke in 1975 as they were dialing their rotary phones. That's how they spoke.
No, you're
right?
absolutely right. And that's why, I detect a little bit of a generational problem here. I was a kid in the silly season. You were like a teenager, basically, sort of roughly speaking here.
Yeah.
Because I sort of, it's like roughly 73 to roughly 85. 86, 87, like that. That's sort of what we're talking about, which is like the prime time of my childhood, right? And so I never knew, like, I never went to a Latin mass as a kid. The first time I went to a Latin mass was Old St. Mary's in Washington, D.C., and I was 22 years old. Okay, so like I didn't, and I didn't go again for another 7, 8 years, whatever, right? So the world that I grew up in is exactly the worst kind of stereotypes that you and I have sort of joked about, but like that was what I grew up with. And what people don't understand about John Paul II is that when he sort of comes along and says, well, okay, like pump the brakes here a little bit. Let's talk about how, Vatican II is sort of, again, the hermeneutics of continuity. Like, we don't have to rehash these arguments, but John Paul II comes around and says, well, actually, no, like things matter, like truth matters, doctrine matters, the deposit of faith matters. And then Benedict XVI rolls around and says, yeah, like it really does. And actually the way we pray, like it matters too. Right. And then to have those that, what is that, like 25 years, 30 years of John Paul II and Benedict XVI, so, and now I'm being asked to just pretend that the 30 years that I grew up in, that's also not true. That's also garbage.
Yeah.
No, I'm not going to do that. Not going to do it.
And this is why people retreat into tradism.
Right. And I'm resisting. You can hear it in my voice, Larry.
Yeah. It is so easy to therefore say, I mean, you can see the allure of it.
Right.
We cannot live with the idea of an infallible church that has made bucket loads of mistakes.
Right. And so then the last thing, I'm sorry, I mean, I have to jam this stuff in.
Go ahead.
Because I've got golf practice. True story. So and then you hear like, well, doubt that doesn't talk, Mike Lewis over at 1 Peter 5, he and I were bantering back and forth on Twitter.
Where Peter is.
Sorry, what did I say? 1 Peter 5, sorry. Where Peter is, Mike and I are sort of bantering back and forth on Twitter, and his point is like, well, doubt that doesn't talk about the abuse crisis. And I'm like, Ross has written a lot about the abuse crisis.
He's written tons about it.
And like that's the other prong of the loss of total credibility. So think about what has happened in our lifetime, Larry. Like there's a sort of a theological crisis in which silly season truly did reign, right? And all bets were off and people were doing a bunch of crazy things. John Paul II and Benedict XVI come around and kind of like tighten that up a little bit and provide some real robust thinking and praying with the church in terms of continuity, right? And then while all that's going on, by the way, they're terrible managers of people and allowed the worst, most despicable evil to take place under the cover of the church.
Yeah.
So I would say that things feel like a failure.
Yeah, and the whole sex abuse. I wish our bishops, if any of them are listening to this, and I don't know if they will be, would understand. I wish our bishops, from the perspective of lay people.
That's right.
Dear bishops, you have less than zero credibility.
Yeah.
Even the good ones that are out there, you're smeared with the same tar. Okay. The episcopacy has lost its moral authority because it's lost its moral credibility. It has zero purchase on anybody's allegiance anymore, which is why one of the most important things about the council was the universal call to holiness. Right. And it's not been applied. It's not been lived up. You mentioned before the gates of hell. I know you got to go soon, but
that's right.
One of the things that always struck me about that metaphor, the gates of hell. Why did ancient cities have gates? Right. The gates were defensive.
That's right.
They were defensive. Right. So the gates of hell are not, in a sense, being aggressive towards the church. The gates of hell are preserving Hades from the church. In other words, the church is pressing the attack on hell. And it's going to be resistant. It's going to be a tough battle, but those gates will eventually give way. Just as the orcs storming Helm's Deep.
So we've worked the metaphor backwards, but it's really it's an opposite facing metaphor.
It is meant to imply that the church triumphant is storming the gates of hell. Okay, and that I link that with the universal call to holiness.
That's great.
A lukewarm church is not storming the gates of hell.
That's right. That's right.
Okay, a holy church is going to storm those gates.
So when you say that the gates will not prevail, in other words, the gates won't hold up.
They won't hold.
That's such a
hell will give way.
Right.
Satan will give way if the church lives a holy, life.
Right.
This is the central message of the council that never, ever, ever was put into action as the council steered the church towards capitulating to
Yeah.
bourgeois modernity,
Right.
which is the opposite of storming the gates of hell. And therein also lies the key to the question of infallibility and my whole thing about the hermeneutics of kenosis and dissent. What
Sure.
we need, one of the other great aspects of the council was its Christocentrism. It wanted to reorient all of theology, all of the tradition, all church teaching around the cruciform nature of Christ.
And that's so Pauline. That's so Pauline, right? I preach Christ
Therefore,
and him
one of the
crucified.
unfinished theological projects of the council was applying that same Christocentrism to the tradition and to reinterrogate the entirety of the tradition through the lens of this cruciform Christ. Whatever does not measure up to the form, the cruciform structure of Christ, is a distortion of revelation.
Right. That's
whatever does measure up is revelation. And I would say burning heretics at the stake does not measure up to the cruciform structure.
Right. Because Larry, look, the thing that we forget, me too, right? So rocks from glass houses, etc. Is that Jesus is the good news.
Yes.
Jesus is the gospel, right? Yes. And look, we love our books. I got my books, you got your books. Like we love, but like Jesus, the man, God in the flesh, he is the good news. And so much of this gets sort of obscured and all this, and that's what I love, that you bring that back to the council. So therefore, right, if in my listening session, right, if I listen to Cardinal Gretsch he of Word Salad Central, has he ever listened to himself is one question I have. Get outside a little bit, talk to people, because the way that you talk, you've literally never talked to somebody who doesn't have a robe on. Okay. Number two is that if you are not hearing Jesus Christ crucified when you go on your listening tour, then you're doing it wrong. It's really not complicated. Not complicated. Bingo.
It's the religion of Pope Winfrey, not the religion of the Pope.
Right. That's great.
Right. No, not the religion of Christ, not the religion of Christ. This is, I'm still working this out, this whole hermeneutical idea, but it's helped me greatly.
Yeah, and no, I really appreciate being able to just sort of talk about these things out loud. I don't really get a chance to do it because like the stuff I do with Rod, is a little bit more culture stuff, and he's not Catholic, so I don't get the chance to do this sort of thing. So I really do appreciate you opening up the Zoom room.
Plus, Rod is very passionate, right?
Yeah. No, I know. Well, you and I are too.
We're both passionate, but Rod's passionate in kind of a different way. I don't know. You know him better than I do. And Rod, if you're listening, I hope you're enjoying. Oh, he's in Chicago right now.
He's heading back to Budapest, I think tomorrow, something like that. So
Anyway, I know you got to go run to
golf practice beckons, my friend.
All right, I'm a horrible golfer. I gave it up years ago.
I should too. All right, Larry, take care. All right, it's awesome. It's great to see you, man.
Okay, talk to you later. Bye.